and it's "Where's My Utopia" from Yard Act. So this was selected by Gemma Crockwell, who writes for 5 to 9, who writes for Left Lion. I mean, Carl, she's your contact essentially. So and you're going to be leading anyway, so maybe you can fill in the rest of the bio, and then lead us on to Yard Act.
Yeah, so yeah, a great pick from a Gemma, who's what she's done with Left Lion over the last couple of years. Obviously, actually gave 5 to 9 its first piece of published press, which is how I sort of came to start writing for those guys as well. So yeah, internally grateful for her and the opportunities that she's given, and grateful for her for picking this record by Yard Act, because I think going back to this date, or going back to their debut, I'd say it was kind of like a classic January release where I remember listening to it, really raving about it in my review, saying, "Oh yeah, this will be one of the best debuts of the year." Saying it'll be up for the Mercury Prize, which I think it was that year.
Yeah.
But then by the time December came around, I think it barely made it into my top 50 of the year. So it was one of those that, in January it sounded great, but as the year went on, it didn't really stick with me compared to some of the other records that year. And I'll be honest, I haven't really been back to it, I think, since it came out. So going into this one, I think it was fairly mild expectations, I would say, but also with the knowledge that they may potentially be stepping things up this time around. They released that single, "The Trenchcoat Museum," which was like this 8-minute dose of like heady electronica, which was, I thought this record was going to be like a sharp left turn. But then when that track wasn't announced for the record and they released Dream Job, which I thought at the time was kind of more in line with what they had given us on the Overload, maybe like more of a gradual step. I thought to myself, okay, maybe this isn't the radical shift that I think it's going to be then. But yeah, having to listen to this one a lot this month, I think it is a big shift from their post-punk roots. I think it's a very much a record where they sort of come out with a statement, you think you know the band that we are, and they completely, rip apart those expectations, and for the better as well. There's bits of pop on here, there's bits of soul, there's bits of disco, there's bits of funk, while still managing at the same time to maintain their own identity throughout the record as well, which I think, it's a hell of an achievement. I've seen lots of comparisons to, Pulp, Gorillaz, which I think are certainly they're certainly there. You can definitely hear those coming through. But I think thanks to James Smith, I think it always still feels like a Yard Act record. He's got quite a unique, way with words, and the way he obviously sort of sings through the songs as well, like he's just having a conversation with you. But yeah, immediately it was like, compared to the Overload, this is a big step up in sound, in ambition, and in the quality of the songcraft as well. It's definitely an album that takes a couple of listens. I think, we were talking about it in the chat, and I think we were all left lukewarm after that first play. But I think it's one that I found that, the more I return to it, the more that I get out of it. I still think in places, it can be a little indulgent. Blackpool Illuminations, for me, that song's probably going to be a favorite for a lot of people. For me, that's where it strays into maybe slightly indulgent. I think a lot of the stories are personal and specifically about being in a band. So I find, while they're always interesting and, it's quite interesting to hear like their story and their journey, but they're not always going to be the most stirring or relatable songs because of that. I think your interest in the lyrical content will be determined by how much you care about their journey that they've gone through, rather than something you can, kind of connect to your own life, which you can obviously can with a lot of songs. But yeah, for me, in terms of the Sonic delights, that's what's kept me coming back. We Make Hits, that was one of the singles that grabbed my attention in the build up. Just super catchy, great guitar groove running all the way through it. Just real kind of tongue in cheek choice of a single. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Down by the Stream. I'm not sure if you got this, Kylie, but it reminds me a bit of Danny Brown.
Yeah.
In the sense that you've got this kind of bizarro hip hop beat that sounds like no one could make a flow that would fit over the top of it, but somehow James kind of pulls it together and makes it work. The Undertow might be my favorite of the whole record. That's the one that's got like the biggest pub vibes, I'd say. James's vocals on there, those great strings that kind of come through. And yeah, I mentioned Dream Job at the top. I didn't enjoy it as a single, but I've grown to love it. Again, just great character to that song. And I really love that final minute where it comes in with that God knows what you're talking about passage. That just gets lodged in my head. So yeah, I think that opening 5 tracks is just fantastic. And, there's some great stuff in the back end too. When Laughter Stops, you've got Katie J. Pearson turning up on that track. I think her voice works wonderfully with the thematic content of that song. David Thewlis, which is like a a really random cameo on that song as well. I think he's on one of the other tracks as well as like a bit of a narrator. Again, just a great little touch throughout the record. Grifter's Grief was kind of like, just that full throttle bit of punk that they kind of throw in at the end of that song. Again, just really tongue in cheek, just really self-aware nod to, what people expect from them. I thought, moments like that throughout the record, I think are just fantastic. And then, the one at the end of the album, Vineyard for the North, just a really kind of triumphant closer. Got that gospel-like refrain of, was it Mother Nature, Bring Me Water, that comes in at the end. I think it's just a great way to round up the record. And yeah, and I'd say as well, the way it's stitched together, each track seamlessly segued into the next one, just makes for a really thrilling listening experience. So yeah, one that as I say, I have quite mild expectations for, and I think they've really kind of over-delivered. I think of all the bands of the kind of post-punk boom that we've had in recent years, Yard Act were probably the one that I'd earmarked to disappear as quickly as they arrived. But yeah, they've made me look foolish because with this album, like I said, they've escaped the confines, I think, of that post-punk tag and shown that they've got, plenty more to give. So yeah, for me, this is a phenomenal sophomore record. And yeah, can't wait to see where they go next.
Yeah, I mean, exceeding expectations. I think I'll dive in next, and then because they are a very, don't know, they're very British band, I would say. And then I think we were chatting about some of the lyrics with Kylie in the chat and say, how does that work across the pond? And I think quite unique in that way. And I did use the post-punk tag as well and the intro as well. So maybe we should loosen our tags for them. But exceeding expectations. I have to agree. I was nodding away a lot to what you were saying, and first listen, I was not sure. And there are still songs on there which I don't think have fully landed, but actually, given it time, I've really grown to enjoy it a lot. An Illusion, I think the opening track. I mean, well, just briefly how I feel about the band, just Whistle Stop Tour. They were one of the bands I was really excited about before they brought out the album because they had this like 4 or 5 songs. They were quite didn't show any photos of themselves, but there was just their typical Yard Act logo, which accompanied all of the 4 tracks before they brought out the debut album. We got to know who they were, and they were really enjoyable. Fixer Upper, they're like some really, and they were a band who, yeah, I was just very excited for when they would, I thought this is going to be my album of the year when it comes out. And I think, as you kind of alluded to as well, the debut album was, it was good. And actually, I was probably, because my expectations are so high, I was disappointed at the beginning. And yet, when revisiting it for the Mercury Prize, I actually grew to quite enjoy it and see it as valid in that list. But I feel with what they've done here, they've kind of picked up the ball from what they did with those early tracks and kind of pushed the boundaries a bit, whereas they did go a little bit safe with the last one. Perhaps the only difference being that the longer tracks, like the Poppies one from the last album, which I absolutely loved. I think when you hear it, kind of a similar one on this second album, it's maybe doesn't punch as much. Blackpool Illuminations didn't. I think it's decent, but nothing more really, and it's a bit overlong. But what they do musically here is pretty fascinating, and yeah, my favorite is the opener, An Illusion, which was quite trip hoppy. Talking about struggling to cope with life on the road, melancholic, reality not matching expectations, and that kind of sums up the lyrical content throughout. Which good concept, I suppose, and they do explore this in a variety of ways, particularly with childhood memories, which yeah, like I say, takes a while to kind of get into that groove with it. We make hits. I think I got here kind of great, kind of awful. I just but ultimately I put it in the good pile. But like there's parts of it, particularly I just really don't like that kind of 90s share like overlay on the vocals, and that's what they put over, which I know they're kind of doing it ironically, but it just it's kind of icky to me. But actually the rest of that track I really enjoy, and I think they deliver on. The Undertow I think is a great shout as one of the best on the album, as you've referred to, Carl, and Dream Job enjoyed as well. Petroleum is one I which comes back on quite a lot, just on the algorithm, as it were, and that's one which I'm not skipping. And yeah, Vineyard for the North is a great way to close it. So yeah, it's another album. I think essentially, with the exception of the Another Sky album, I think with all 4 of the other ones, I didn't love all of the tracks, but it was kind of in that 3/4 bracket. And again, Yard Act's Where's My Utopia is in a similar space, but probably slightly above the others, in terms of how many were on the higher track. And yeah, it's just enjoyable to see them sort of explore so many different ideas here, and yeah, break out of certainly the confines of the debut one, which yeah, I think, as you say, played it safe. So yeah, very pleased, exceeded expectations. Don't need to say much more. There's the view this side of the pond. Now I hand it over to our friend in Santa Fe. So for what you make of it, Kiley.
Pleasantly surprised myself as well. As you guys know, the Overload, I felt that Yard Act was way late to the party on the British post-punk revival thing going on, and thought it was critically way overrated. And then I kept on thinking about this interview that James Smith did while I was listening to this record, because after the Overload came out, I don't remember who it was with, but he said in there, well, yeah, we're not really a post-punk band, and we just did it because that's what's cool at the moment, essentially along those lines. And then I got even more mad about that record, and just kind of like writing these guys off. And yeah, Trenchcoat Museum, kind of a surprise last summer that I don't know if I loved it, but I was intrigued. And so Where's My Utopia kind of just, I think my expectations were below both of yours, but I was open to it after that single. And yeah, I mean, for all the heavy lyrics, this is just a fun dance, kind of disco. Um, you know, not necessarily stylistically, but what this album always keeps reminding me of is like Talking Heads and David Byrne, in the sense of uh there's some adventure to it, and a little bit of a left field. And so I think on the Overload, where they were just in this lane that had already been established, Where's My Utopia really gets into, I don't know, is this what this band is supposed to sound like? Because it seems to me, that they're on the right path. And Carl, you mentioned like the comparisons to Gorillaz, and it makes sense because Remy Kabaka Jr., who's the drummer for Gorillaz, produced it. And so, and on that front, I think this is way more fun and interesting than many of the last Gorillaz records. And so it's kind of fun to have this next step for that influence. Overall, I agree with pretty much everything you guys have said. So I'm not going to waste the time, but for me, the highlight of the album is When the Laughter Stops, because it's a great song, but Katie J. Pearson has been one of my favorites. Her debut came along in the cold of the pandemic and was very comforting during that time when a lot of music wasn't. And I thought her sophomore record was fantastic and just one of my favorite voices in music right now. So it's fun to have her teaming up with them on this dancier rock song that, that one in particular is like somewhere between like Confidence Man and B-52s. Just I think, yeah, they did just release that as a single, but I mean, to me, I would have led with that one for this record. Really just gives you a good idea of where this thing really went. And yeah, I mean, I've been recommending this record and listening to it all the time. All these albums this month, especially because they came out at the beginning of the month, which is very easy. Thank you. Just everything this month, this is right there with it, that I've really enjoyed just digging into these records and listening to them over and over. And so, who knows what's next for Yard Act? It could be something completely different, but at this moment in time, I think they, an Americanism, they hit it out of the park.